Alright, so before I go into actual commanding, I wanted to talk a bit about the baseline. So like what you're gonna do before you start commanding, how you can move. There's a few points that are important, in my opinion, if you're gonna be commanding. Obviously, voice comm. If you want to be effective, you have to be on Discord or TeamSpeak or whatever, but you're not going to be able to type fast enough and do competitive combat if you're not on voice. So that's a no-brainer. One thing that's a bit less obvious, I guess, is skill level. I'm sure there's a lot of people who hesitate to tag up because they're afraid they're not good enough or whatever. I can assure you I'm never like the best player in my squad, and you don't have to be the best player in your squad mechanically to league the squad. So you don't have to be amazingly good, but you need to be decent, basically. So you need to have a general knowledge of the meta, the builds. You need to know what does what. You need to recognize the things that are dangerous, the general, the cools. You don't have to know like all the intricacies, the name of the Grandmaster trait for this build that you never played or whatever. But you need to have some understanding of how the game is played. You need to know, for instance, if a Veil goes up and the whole enemy squad comes to you, you need to know what this is. You need to recognize a warrior bubble and things like that. So you don't need to be a top tier competitive player to start commanding, but you need to have some basic knowledge of the game, which I assume most people that want to start commanding, they've at least followed some tags so they're aware of these things. One thing I think is a bit less important at this stage, but was discussed a bit on Discord, is what build do you want to play when you command. So most people are going to lead on Firebrand or Chrono. I don't think it's super important what you pick. We haven't seen commanders on other things. I think Firebrand is better. Chrono is quite good as well. But if you want to lead on whatever else, it's your call. Just know that it's possible that you're going to get less followers, for instance. If someone sees, I don't know, a core ranger tagging up, might not get a lot of people joining your squad, right? If you're on Firebrand or Chrono, you might have more people. And the last thing regarding baseline is obviously I'm talking about tagging up on Gandara. So right now we have a strong link with Fortranic, which you can use to your advantage and follow their tags to learn more hardcore fights. But on Gandara, when you tag up, you may get the support of some good guilds, but you may also get a squad that's mostly made up of pugs. So you have to keep that in mind. And I'm going to try to keep that in mind as I talk about the different things you can do. Is that you may not have the super hardcore player in your squad, and that's a reality. A lot of the time you might have parties without stability or without clans. You might be lacking necros, you might have no warrior bubble, and so on. So you need to be aware of all that. So now the baseline's out of the way, let's start about commanding proper. One of the most important thing for commanding is communication. So it's very important. That's why I mentioned obviously you need to be on voice. I would say it falls into three categories of communication. There's communication like right now we're out of combat or before combat, can be more relaxed. You're often gonna have people just chatting about random stuff and so on, and that's all good. One first advice I would give though, when you're out of combat or before combat, try to keep your squad somewhat focused. Sometimes it's like a clown fest, which, I mean, it's fine, it's a game, but I've seen many times where we wipe, whether I'm tagged or somebody else is tagged, because we're just not focused about the game anymore at all. And some group just comes from behind and nobody's paying attention, or some group is in the tower stealth about to jump on us. So one thing you can do before combat is try to keep your squad focused. Often I will ask a scout to go towards spawn, for instance. We're here at Green Arrow, let us know if somebody's coming behind, or ask someone to sniff here the tower, note this group hiding in the tower about to jump us. So that's before combat. It can be more relaxed, but try to keep the squad at least somewhat focused, so you don't get one pushed out of nowhere. And then there's a most important part, it's in combat, or like right before combat. Like let's say we're here, we see there's a group coming from spawn, and the combat's about to begin. So one thing you need to do when you're commanding, you need to be very clear in what you want to do. So your squad knows what your intentions are. And you also want to be succinct. So you don't want to drag on and so on. You try to give quick instructions that are clear so people can understand them. And often you'll see commanders, they repeat the instructions multiple times. Especially the case here, we are in like a EU server, so you have people from different countries. You might have an accent. I mean, I have an accent, people have different accent, they might not understand English perfectly. So if you repeat things multiple times, make sure that people can understand it. And that's why you often have people that they call bomb 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 or whatever. So people get the message of what is expected from the squad at the time you call for it. One thing also, in terms of communication, that's non-verbal, but it's very handy, is to use markers. Oftentimes, you have to go in one specific direction. And if you say move back or right or left, it's very common to lose people because their left is not your left because they were looking at a slightly different direction or things like that. Again, if you're in a very proficient group, that's going to be less of an issue because in general, they're going to be looking the same way you are. But overall, I recommend using landmarks or markers to clearly communicate where you want to go with the group. Right now, it's obvious we're following the path, the road, but if you want to go a specific direction, put markers down. I find that very convenient. It's also easier for people to see. You can also see that on the minimap and so on. So use marker when you can. A lot of the time, you will hear countdown. So that's actually pretty good to give countdowns because it's very easy for people then to follow the instruction. If you say import in 3, 2, 1, importers, and then we're gonna move in front in 3, 2, 1, and you move at 1, and so on. I would just say one thing. It's another, I would say, a pet peeve, but it can be annoying if you're following a commander and they say we're gonna move in 3, 2, 1, or stuff like that. Try to, if you can do a countdown, try to do a proper countdown. If you say gonna move, you do a countdown and you start moving before the countdown is over, stuff like that. It's an easy way to get your quite straight here. See what the countdown is for. If you say I'm gonna move left in 3, 2, 1, that's of course we just say Vale to try. Vale is a good example as well. So, but that goes back to what I was saying earlier, but explaining clearly what the intent is, and then you can do countdown. One thing, of course, it can happen. Like let's say we bridge this gate, and there's a 30-man group behind the gate. We're also 30, and you say, okay, we're gonna import and push left in 3, 2, 1. You import, and then you stop for some reason because you see that they're just about to bomb or a wire just dropped a bubble or stuff like that. That's fine. Plans can change, and they do change all the time, but you have to communicate that. If you're a commander, it's very easy to follow tag because you're the tag, right? But people can easily get distracted, so you want to try to give people as much slack as possible. Again, if you're in a super good group and so on, there's a lot of things that don't apply as much. But yeah, when you're in a pug squad like we often are in Gandara, you want to give people as much help as possible when you're tagged up. So you want to repeat instructions. You want to be giving them clear instructions. If you change your plan, even if it might be obvious that you stopped, you call it out and so on. You want to basically give people no excuse not to be on tag. And one last thing also, I mean, some people can be a bit more shy and whatnot. Don't be afraid to raise your voice. Sometimes there's going to be people that are very chatty and they can be talking over you or whatever, and something important is happening. Yeah, there's some people. It's fine. I mean, it's good. It's part of the community. It's fun. But if you're commanding, you don't have to be afraid to sometimes shout over people. And yeah, clear commander. It's not like you don't have to be super aggressive or toxic. Although I've heard that people like when the commanders shout on them. I guess to each their own. But yeah, you don't be afraid to speak up. Exactly what like Sasha said in Squad chat. Say focus up now and speak over. Sometimes you have to get the discipline back in line. Especially the case when you've had a lot of success and people start getting overconfident or whatever, or you're just fighting groups that are smaller or that are just plain bad. And then all of a sudden there's a new commander or a new group on the map, and you just get one push because people were just talking about whatever over you, not listening, and you wipe stupidly because of that lack of focus. So don't be afraid to speak over, to speak up, and shout a bit. If you have to take anything out of this whole communication bit, remember, be clear about your intentions. If you change your intention in the middle of combat, which happens all the time, say it. Basically, try to give your squad no excuse to not follow what you expect them to follow. Be clear, repeat, and exactly say what you're gonna do and when. And then the last bit of communication, so we talked a bit about what we do between combat or before, and then in combat, and then after combat. What I think is quite useful, and sometimes it's done, it's to do a small review. Whether you won or you lost, there's always something to be learned. So if you wiped, why did you wipe? What happened? People get caught, stability was given too late, or if you won, maybe you won, but it was more difficult than it needed to be, things like that. So do a little squad review. It can also be good for you as a commander, especially if you're new. People might say, well, that push there, that was a bit too deadly. We lost too many people at the start, and so on. So after combat, and especially even if you're an experienced commander, but especially if you're a new commander, you're learning, don't hesitate to do a little review. If you have arc DPS, look a bit at the numbers, see what was good. Like maybe you were lacking, you had like no bonus stripping or no damage, or the planets were bad and people kept getting immobilized in bombs, things like this. This training here, it's all good, but the only way you're gonna learn actually to command and be a good commander is practice. For proper practice, when you've done a round or a fight, if you want proper improvement, you need to discuss what was done, what was good, and what was bad, and that's fine. People make mistakes. It's not like you don't have to take it personally if you made a big mistake or something stupid. I do stupid pushes all the time, sometimes just because I'm bored of fighting the group I'm fighting, because maybe they're playing too defensively or they won't engage, so I do a push that's suicidal. You do stuff like that sometimes out of boredom or whatever, or just plain mistakes as well. But it's good to discuss after the fight with your squad what was good, what was bad. And as I said with the baseline as well, in your squad you're often going to have people that are better players than you mechanically or whatever, and they know some stuff, so it's good to listen. Commander is not like the best player in the squad. That is good to do a little review at the end of the fight. And guilds do that all the time. They review footage, they look at movement in detail. So this is like the lowest level you could do to improve, is just that little review after combat. Of course, if you want to go further, you can record your gameplay and then look at the video after the fact and see what was done right. And after communication, that's a bit more tricky. As a commander, it's movement. So one of the things, especially true of a puck squad, is let's say that I'm stacking up here, I'm say stack swiftness. You don't want to stand still too long if there's an enemy group within range. The reason is there's always a bit of inertia. Let's move now. You see I move left and there's still some people there. There's always going to happen with pucks where people have like a 1, 2 or even 3 seconds delay after you moved off. And if we were facing an enemy Zerg right now and they just do a range ref spike on the spot where we stood, there you go, just lost a few people. So it's always good. You have to stack at some points, like you have to stack for might, or you have to stack before you're gonna take a veil, things like that. That's especially with pugs. Avoid staying static too long. That's why you even see some commanders, they just move, it seems like pointlessly, like they move left and then they move right and they put some markers just to keep people moving, so you're not an easy target for the enemy squad. So that's the first thing. Try to, you need to stack sometimes for some things, but don't stand still. If you're in range of an enemy Zerg, you're basically giving them free targets. And even if you yourself, and like half your squad has a good reaction and they're gonna dodge out a bomb in time, you don't want to lose some people just because they're a bit slow to react. So keep that in mind. There's like a inertia with the squad, and some people are gonna be a bit slow to react. Another thing is you try to position yourself when you're fighting a Zerg in a way that you have more than one obvious move. So here, for instance, it's not a bad spot. Let's say that we're here and there's a squad inside the camp and they push out and you move here. Well, for the commander, it's going to be kind of easier for them to cut you off, right? If they move right in front of you, you don't really have a lot of options, right? You go left, they bomb left, you go right, they bomb right. You basically cornered yourself. So in general, try to not put yourself in a position where your next move is going to be obvious to the enemy commander, because then they're just going to be ready, call it out, and bomb that move. Another example is, for instance, when you go up on a wall of a tower or a keep, and the enemy is below you and they can easily pull and bomb. If you're fighting a strong group, and your group is lacking stability or support, it's almost guaranteed they're going to pull people when you're up on the wall and bomb people. So try to put yourself in an advantageous position. It's not always easy, like sometimes you're fighting multiple Zergs and you're cornered and so on. Try to avoid putting yourself in a position where you're stuck and you have no options. Another thing is use terrain to your advantage. So let's say, for instance, we're here and there's a Zerg there on the other side of the arch where the green arrow is, and they have a lot of range. We can just step a bit to the right here, so they can't see you and they don't have line of sight. And that can be quite useful if they don't have line of sight, because you can see the choke if they push there and bomb there. So using line of sight, here it's like a very obvious position because there's very clear choke, but sometimes it's not as clear, but still you can like hug a corner a bit. Example would be like Ogo Watchtower, the little hill. You can follow the curve of the hill so they don't have clear line of sight on you. Things like this are important. So using your terrain to your advantage, that's a key component. So chokes, line of sight. If you take anything from the positioning, these are important things. These are all stuff usually that's before the combat even begins, right? You try to position yourself properly so you're not an easy target, or so when you push the enemy commander can just bomb you and you wipe right away. Another thing is, let's say the combat has begun or is about to begin, try to not take the bait. So there's signs usually that an enemy squad is going to try to bait you into moving somewhere or bombing there or stuff like that. If the commander is super far, like if they had the green arrow there and they put a veil at the purple dot, they're going to get out of stealth by the time they reach this choke. So it's very likely to be a fake. They might chain the veils and so on. It's likely to be a bait veil. So don't waste your bomb, because if they do that, they can just go towards you, then turn around and you wasted your bomb. So try to save your bomb. Like if they're at the heart and then they veil, there's a high chance that they're gonna be actually pushing you. Then you can bomb. Then you can have like a defensive bubble and CC. But if they're further away and they're just trying to bait some damage, don't take the bait. So that's one example of bait. Another example, it's not really bait, well, it can be. Let's say that you've killed some people and they start running away. Sometimes commander actually run away because they lost 2 people. That happens. But sometimes they just try to bait you into chasing them. I've often had this happen where I wouldn't say we wipe, but we done quite a few people, and then people get overconfident because we start chasing. So let's say we're here and the commander tries to go towards purple, and people just chase. But the whole way as we chase this group, they drop damage behind them, and people go down, while themselves they're just sustaining. We're not getting any extra downs. And then we're stretched and we have downs, and they turn back, they bomb because we're stretched, and we lose the fight. Don't take that kind of bait. And if you're chasing, usually, I try to call that usually when I'm commanding, chasing a group that's moving back in a straight line, you can follow them from the side, you can move on the left and drop your damage on the right. You don't have to be on top of them. Especially true if they have like 10 Necros with Trail of Anguish. Last thing you want to do is follow them straight and have all your stack being corrupted and then, of course, stretched, basically wiping stupidly like this. Okay, one more thing I would like to say about movement. I see some commanders sometimes, and it's often the case when you're a bit less experienced. They just go forward non-stop. It's just move forward, like people say, like a W or whatever the key, just going straight forward. That's usually not ideal, unless, of course, obviously, if the squad you're fighting is just bad or tiny, like you're 50 under 15, of course. So just moving forward like that, it's generally not a good idea. First, because it's obvious for the enemy where you are when you're gonna be, but also there's always some people in your squad in the back that they're gonna be chilled or crippled or they're gonna get support. And what always happens is that your squad gets stretched. So if you're fighting a similar size or skill level squad and you're just going straight to them non-stop in the fight, and then even if you take turns, right, you move left and you move right, but just move non-stop towards the enemy, you're gonna lose people in the back that get no stability or no cleanse or whatever, and your squad's gonna stretch. So what I usually like to do is try to do some regroups. Sometimes combat is just super intense and it's difficult to do regroups, but regroups allow for people that got caught in the back that didn't get proper support, or also, you know, people who don't listen and YOLO a bit, but you give them a chance to come back on tag. And that goes back to what I was talking about when I was talking about communication earlier. When some things might seem like obvious or like you're repeating yourself too much or saying things that are like anyone who's just looking will see it. But you want to give your squad as much chance as possible to get on tag and play with you. I repeat, it might not be your fault at all as a commander that people are not listening or not paying attention or whatever, but you try to give people no excuse not to be on tag. So you explain clearly what you're doing. You do regroup so they can catch up if they were, YOLOing a bit and things like this. So that's important if you can do regroups. And also, I mean, beyond just the regrouping aspect, the aspect of resustaining. Like if you're in a big tough fight, lots of people low, you do regroup, you do like a burst healing with some good resustain and you get everybody back up. So that's also good to do regroups. So that's regarding movement mostly. And again, same as with communication, a lot of the stuff with commanding, it's experience, right? If you're new here to commanding, you might get some key points, but the only way you're gonna learn is basically get your command to tag on, getting a squad, and fighting groups, especially fighting strong groups. Another point, so we talked a bit about communication, which is super important, and movement is super important. Another point is awareness. So let's say you get communication down, you're very good at communicating to your squad what you expect from them. That's great. That's probably the easiest part when you start commanding is to communicate what you want. The movement, that's usually a bit more tricky. And then after that, I would say one thing that's important is the general awareness. So you might be good at moving, you might be good at communicating, but sometimes some commanders are gonna have a blind spot, right? They just don't pay attention, or you might just miss it because you focus on something else. And there's like 5 downed enemies on the side, and you just move away instead of cleaving them. These guys get revived, and then you've committed to your damage, you get counterbomb, and you might lose a fight that you would have won if you had focused the enemies that were downed. So it's important to be aware. And I say enemy down, but it's also true of allies that are down. If you have people in your squad that got caught and just ignore it completely, again, there's a small caveat here. Sometimes some people, I mean, and you will then learn that as you command, there's people that just don't listen, they just YOLO all the time and they die. You don't want to, and I mean, I still make this mistake all the time, trying to save people that just gonna repeat the same mistake after revive them. Like literally you revive somebody and they just dodge towards the enemy and walk into a bomb. So that happens. I'm not talking about that kind of situation. I'm talking about, people that got caught in a bomb or a CC or whatever. Try to focus and cleave down enemies, but also try to get your allies that are down back up. Try to keep your squad alive, obviously, and to cleave the downed enemies. This goes back to some commanders, they refer to fighting another group as peeling an onion. And every time you kill some people, it's like you peel the layer off the onion and you try to peel all the layers. So that's basically the cleaving of the downs and not ignoring that you get some downs and focusing them. Another thing that's also quite important, talking about general awareness as a commander. So there's down enemies, down allies. You have to be aware of your squad composition and of the cooldowns, right? If you have a melee heavy squad, then you're gonna be wanting to push more. If you don't, which happens actually quite a bit on Gandara, you have to play to your strength, basically. If the enemy has 20 Necros and you have 3, and you lack sustain, but you have like I don't know how many Dragon Hunters and Weavers and Revs, you want to play to your strength, basically. That's true regardless of the composition. If your squad is good for compact melee push, then you do that. If your squad is not good for that, then don't do that. But you have to be aware of your strength and your weaknesses. And you also have to be aware of your cooldowns. If you have only one Mesmer, and they just called a veil, well, you have to know you're not going to get another veil for over a minute. I mean, I think it's 70 something seconds, maybe veil activity it's going to be less. So you have to be aware of that. And the gyro from your scrappers for stealth, it's a minute. So you need to be aware of these cooldowns. You don't call something that's not ready. So yeah, be aware of your squad composition and be aware of the cooldowns. And one thing also that's quite important, I see some commanders do that. It's more true if you're fighting better squads and stuff like that. And it goes also to the awareness with the movement. It's difficult as a commander not to stand out, right? Because usually you move and you're gonna be in the front and people will see you. But you need to be aware when you stand out too much. If I'm like commanding right now and I'm like always a mile ahead from my squad, that's bad, right? Because even if I'm not being focused and the enemy just bombed the group pushing us and you're pushing kind of alone, well, you're gonna take the whole bomb and melt. And it doesn't matter what kind of build you're running. There's no build that allows you to just face tank a full enemy bomb. These are basically the key points. So communication, communicate clearly what you want to do, give cooldowns and so on. Movement, try to use the terrain to your advantage, things like that. Use markers after combat, communicate what you want, and awareness, your squad composition, the cooldowns, the enemy downs, the allied downs, and so on. So all of these are very basic. I think that basically covers what I think you need. Don't take. Yeah, there's a lot of like small side stuff, but the things that you learn in practice.